Crowds thronged the streets on March 28th in the Philippine city of Davao to wish former President Rodrigo Duterte a happy 80th birthday.
Happy birthday, happy birthday. Bring him home.
They want to bring him home from The Hague in the Netherlands, where he's being investigated by the International Criminal Court for crimes allegedly from 2011 to 2019, straddling his mayoralty and presidency. The ICC arrest warrant against Duterte is for the crimes against humanity of murder, torture and rape. Officially, between 6,000 and 7,000 Filipinos died, but human rights organizations place the figure at 20,000 to 30,000. While many voices in the southern Mindanao province support Duterte, others do not.
Sa tingin ko matatanggap niya ang wish na magtatagal siya sa The Hague dahil uusigin siya ng mamamayan, kanyang pinaslang, mga pamilyang nawala ng pamilya.
The only country to speak out about Rodrigo Duterte's arrest was China. What does it say about the former president's ties with China? Could the trial negatively impact Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s presidency? And given the ICC's ability to arrest and try Duterte, could any possible Taiwan ICC membership help deter a Chinese invasion? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Khvat. Joining us today are Chyungly Lee, National Chengchi University Institute of International Relations Professor and Research Fellow, and Sasha B. Chhabra, Institute for National Defense and Security Research Visiting Fellow. Very warm welcome to both of you on the show today. The ICC launched its investigation into Duterte in 2018. A month later, Duterte announced the country's withdrawal from the ICC, effective March 2019. His successor, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., has not moved to rejoin the international body. Here's the reason why.
I do not recognize the jurisdiction of ICC in the Philippines. I consider it as a threat to our sovereignty. Therefore, the Philippine government will not lift a finger to help any investigation that the ICC conducts.
The ICC is still investigating crimes during the time Manila was a member of the ICC. The next step in the process is the confirmation of charges hearing, where the evidence presented by the prosecution will be examined to determine if there is sufficient basis to proceed to a full trial. Professor Lee, let me come to you first. So the Philippine Elections Commission has confirmed that Duterte's name is still on the ballot. Now, he and his daughter are hoping that he can carry on campaigning for the midterm elections for mayor of Davao. What's the likelihood of this happening?
I think for him to come back to the Philippines is kind of very unlikely. But although he is not there, he still have a lot of influence. And we can see that after his arrest, the protest on his birthday was very huge and big, right? So I think he still has a lot of chance, a very big chance to win, especially when his son, Sebastian Duterte, is on the ballot for as a vice mayor, okay? And the other candidate is independent. So they still have a very strong group support there.
Right, so we can't rule out the possibility that Duterte could be elected and the vice mayor could be the acting mayor in his place. Sasha, so if Duterte's ICC case fails to proceed and he becomes mayor, what sort of impact, together with his daughter, do you think this could have on the next presidential election in 2028?
Well, I think it's important to separate two things here, right? One is the domestic Philippine considerations, but what I'd like to talk about are what are the implications for the International Criminal Court. This is an opportunity for the ICC, which is under global attack, to prove itself as a neutral arbiter of justice, right? To mete out as a court of last resort, determinations on crimes against humanities. So regardless of whether or not there are implications domestically for Filipino politics, there are implications for the ICC. If Duterte is found guilty, this strengthens the ICC at a time when it is under global attack, and it could provide a deterrent against future world leaders who do such crimes in the future.
Does it set a precedent then with other world leaders, such as Russian President Vladimir Putin and Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu, who so far ignored the ICC arrest warrant so far?
It certainly sets a precedent, right? There's only been, in the history of the ICC, there's only been one head of state ever tried and convicted, and that was the former president of Côte d'Ivoire. This has kind of earned the ICC the moniker of the Court for Africans, and it's been viewed by a lot of countries around the world as a biased institution against Africa. As we see, it's gone after more Western-aligned countries and countries in other parts of the world. We see now the first head of state in Asia is potentially facing trial before the ICC. This is giving an opportunity for the ICC to prove itself as an truly international institution of justice. So whether this provides some deterrent against Vladimir Putin or Benjamin Netanyahu or the Burmese junta leader or anyone else who's facing one of these arrest warrants, that's one question. It certainly is constricting a lot of travel. But the bigger question is, what can this do in the future? The deterrent should not be against those who have already committed crimes or allegedly committed crimes. The deterrent should be that world leaders simply should not commit crimes against humanity.
Professor Lee, let's move back to Asia and to the Philippines. If Duterte is eventually convicted, how may the deepening, the hardening of those divisions in the Philippines, could they impact Marcos's presidency? That's one thing, and also the future direction of the Philippines.
One thing that he has immediately sent to Hague, reduce his influence in the Philippines. If he is still in the Philippines, probably he has more voice, but that doesn't mean it does not have any risk for domestic stability, right? So, but according to the most recent poll, that most of the Philippines are Filipino, they kind of agree and support the trial, say that Duterte has to be investigated for his actual judicial killings, right? But that doesn't mean that they support Marcos. So that is kind of separate. On the issue of Duterte, they think, yes, you have to be tried. But on the election, the coming election, probably still remains to be seen.
Okay, all right. Now, Beijing was the only government to comment on Duterte's arrest. The Chinese Foreign Ministry had these remarks to the ICC.
这是一个重要的突发事件。中方注意到有关消息，并正在密切关注事态发展。我想重申，中国一贯主张国际刑事法院应严格遵循补充性管辖原则，依法审慎行使职权，避免政治化和双重标准。
Before his arrest, Duterte's unannounced trip to Hong Kong set off speculation he was trying to evade the ICC arrest by seeking asylum with Beijing. Duterte and his daughter held a campaign rally in Hong Kong's Wan Chai district ahead of the midterm elections in the Philippines. The Reuters investigation found that 1/3 of the social media accounts supporting Duterte after his ICC arrest were fake, far greater than the average 10% when discussing highly sensitive issues globally. However, the investigation didn't identify the source of those fake accounts. Sasha, going back to Mao Ning's comments, in your view, was she implying that the ICC is politically motivated and has double standards?
Well, I think, again, there are two questions here, right? There's the Filipino domestic question, and there's the question of the legitimacy and operation of the ICC. Clearly, we know Duterte is Xi Jinping's guy in the Philippines. When Duterte led the Philippines came very close to China and moved away from its alliance with the United States. And we're seeing that go in the other direction now that Marcos is back. So on one level, Beijing is looking out for Duterte and would like to see someone in his vein return to power, right? But on the other hand, we also see the question of the legitimacy of the ICC. This is not an institution that Beijing or other large countries like, right? Because it puts, in theory, restrictions on their ability to break international law and to commit crimes against humanity, right? It should serve ideally as a deterrent against all states, big and small, and that's why it's important that it is upheld, right? For example, one point that I've been making in the media here is the necessity of Taiwan joining the ICC, not necessarily as a deterrent against a full-scale invasion, but as a deterrent against other crimes against humanity, such as the blockade of critical energy supplies, medicine, food, that China may attempt to do and has threatened to do many times in the past.
Okay, we'll be getting to that a little bit later, Sasha. So, Professor Lee, in your view, was Mao Ning saying that the ICC has double standards?
I think Marcos at the very beginning, I think the videos also show that at the very beginning, he doesn't want to have ICC involved in the Duterte's case, right? But later, it changed the attitude. We noticed that. And then, so they changed the witness. right? And they cooperate with the Interpol and then implemented the arrest warrant there. Okay, so I think, and of course, we know that it's because of the impeachment and separation of the Vice President Sasha Duterte and Marcos, right? So a series of political incidents there. And so that's why people will think about the probably is politicized. Okay.
Can you explain to our audience what the relationship means? Sasha's mentioned kind of the accommodation by Duterte during his presidency of China.
We know that Duterte, his first state visit, he gave it to China. So when he visited China in 2016, at the same year, he kind of silenced out the arbitration rulings about South China Sea that happened in July, right? So this, of course, very obvious that he kind of trade off the South China Sea issues with economic benefits, and then try to link with BRI, the One Belt One Road project, with his own BBB called Build programs domestically. And so we know that the shift of Duterte's policy back then is quite obvious. But of course, later he changed a more soft-balanced approach. We also noticed that because some of the cooperations did not go well.
And Sasha, bringing you back in, so therefore, what do you think Duterte means for China now? Why do you think it is that it's important for China to support Duterte?
Well, I think there are two aspects of this, right? One is, he's an ally, so they've been supporting him. But we don't want to read too much into this. Remember, he came back from Hong Kong. He did not ultimately seek asylum in Hong Kong or China. Whether he intended to, we may never know. But China is not necessarily a reliable partner. They're not one that will, host indefinitely their foreign friends. They'll easily let them go. Duterte himself, he's not eligible for re-election as president, right? The bigger question, I think, is of Beijing's attempt to delegitimize the ICC, right? They want to make sure that this institution of which China is not a part is weaker, it has less power, and that there's less strength in international law that can hold back Beijing's ambitions, whether it's conquering Taiwan, whether it's infringing on the Philippine sovereignty in the West Philippine Sea. These are part of China's larger goals, rather than simply one individual world regional leader, rather.
Last December, The Guardian reported that the Taiwanese government was considering joining the ICC, in part as a countermeasure against China's increasing military pressure. While the proposal was formally recommended by an independent annual review of Taiwan's human rights efforts in 2024, there has been no indication from the government that it intends to take the step. Supporters say membership would help increase Taiwan's global participation in the face of China's efforts to isolate this democracy. Professor Lee, what are the ways that Taiwan could attempt to join the ICC, and what's the likelihood of this happening?
ICC, you need to be a signatory of the so-called Rome, Treaty of Rome statutes. And so that's the first difficulty we have, right?
And the difficulty is because?
Because you need a state. You can apply and claim that Taiwan or the Taiwan area is under the jurisdiction of ICC. You can unilaterally declare that, of course. And ICC, whether they will accept it or really do something about it, it all depends. There are some conditions there. The crime has to be in the state party, okay? Or has to be committed by a national or state party, or referred by UN Security Council to the ICC and start the investigation. For the first one, other state parties, they can collectively submit the request for investigation. That's what happened in Ukraine.
Right. Yeah. And Sasha, of course, you've written articles about Taiwan, sort of urging Taiwan. You think it's a good idea to try to join the ICC. Why do you think it will be straightforward?
Well, there are two questions, right? Why is this straightforward as a process, but also why is it a straightforward decision? I think it's a no-brainer decision for the Taiwanese government to decide today to join the International Criminal Court. Why? There's currently a global campaign to erase Taiwan off the map, and China is winning this. China is pushing Taiwan more and more out of international institutions, is trying to delegitimize Taiwan as a state, and is trying to make sure Taiwan has no contact and ability to make international relations with other countries. This is one institution that's not part of the UN. Membership is not required to be a UN member state. And Taiwan can actually join in an institution that China is not part of and declare that it is itself a sovereign, independent state, as we all know it is. It may be called ROC Taiwan, but it's an independent sovereign state, and it has the right to join the ICC, just like it has the right to join other states. As professors pointed out, there are two options for doing this, right? There's the unilateral declaration, and there's depositing an instrument of accession to the Rome Statute with the UN Secretary General. As many Taiwanese know, the UN option is a dead end right now. The UN is essentially captured by China and is very anti-Taiwan. But there's this whole other avenue that's completely available to Taiwan, a unilateral declaration that can be done by the executive yuan, just stating that Taiwan and the area controlled by the government of Taiwan is under the ICC's jurisdiction. This is something that does not even need the legislator to be involved. President Lai tomorrow could do this, and Taiwan would go under the jurisdiction of the ICC. Yes, there would be some dispute, but this is a chance for Taiwan to make that case globally that it is an independent jurisdiction and it is an independent state and has the right to engage in these international institutions.
So Sasha, why do you think it hasn't taken the step so far?
I think there are two main options, right? One is there's been a large timidity on the Taiwanese government and its foreign policy for the past several years. There's been a lack of surety and a focus on often the wrong goals, like joining the World Health Assembly as an observer state, which is never going to happen, and it's not going to accomplish anything for Taiwan, right? So there's been a lack of focus on some of these smaller institutions that are actually quite important and have other options, right? Another reason is fear of the United States. This is not a place where Taiwan would be aligned with the United States on foreign policy. The U.S. is not a member state of the court and is actually quite hostile to the court, as we've seen. That's why I've been looking very closely at the reaction to the Philippines' decision to cooperate with the court. But what we've seen is that there's simply no response from the United States. The United States has essentially two concerns when it comes to the court. One is the potential for Americans to go before the court, and the second is the potential for Israelis to go before the court. None of these questions are at play when it comes to East Asia, when it comes to Taiwan and the Philippines. If Taiwan is really, really worried, what they can do to assuage American concerns is they could sign a bilateral agreement with the United States, as over 100 countries have done, just stating that they won't extradite U.S. service members or U.S. citizens to the court. There's some dispute over the merits of that, but dozens and dozens of U.S. allies, including NATO allies, have done so. They're members of the ICC. They cooperate with the ICC, and they face no repercussions. So what the Taiwanese government needs to do is get over the fear of doing something that's a little different from U.S. foreign policy and make a bold statement that Taiwan is an independent country that does its own foreign policy. It doesn't just repeat U.S. talking points. This is an opportunity to raise support in Europe, in Africa, and Latin America, countries where Taiwan has been steadily losing support over the past few decades.
Professor Lee, are there any risks at all?
We know the difficulties, right? And I think if we count on this as a deterrence, then deterrence will work only when there is a credibility, right? So there are several things we have to look in details about how ICC works, okay? And then we will assess whether we really can achieve the deterrence effect. Taiwan, ROC, has unilaterally declared that we will follow international law in many, many aspects already, okay? So that's no problem for us to declare that. But the thing is, after declaration, whether we really can reach the goal of deterrence there. Okay. So we need a lot of cooperation and support from international community. Right? So for instance, like before you become a real state party, if there is something you want the ICC to do the investigation, you need international state parties, I mean, from other countries to ask for us. Don't think about that we can ask help from UN Security Council, right? So this is very important to really estimate. The thing is, I think it will be safer if the situation across the Taiwan Strait is not that in high tensions. Okay, so because you know a lot of international friends has already think that Taiwan is a very dangerous place, and if we declare that we need protection or we will handle under ICC jurisdiction, probably will cause a misunderstanding. Okay.
But this is the lack of confidence that's leading to this, right?
Sasha, I want you to address, you know, the difficulty that Taiwan finds in joining sort of like bodies or blocs. I'll give you some examples. CPTPP, that's obviously trade. RIMPAC, that's actually American-led military, exercises IPEF, Joe Biden's initiative, which is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, again, US-led. And the problem that Taiwan had is not just because within these, China isn't a member, right? But it's also the pressure that China places on other members. Can you sort of help to reflect on that and why you think things might be different for the ICC?
This is exactly why it's an important opportunity for Taiwan to raise this with its allies in places like Europe and Australia. You know, we've seen a lot of these countries going around and passing resolutions about Resolution 2758, right? Reiterating that the UN has actually never ruled whether or not Taiwan is a country, whether it's part of China. This has never been done, right? But the question is, can that be followed up with actually some substance? So if those countries are interested in asserting very clearly that UN Resolution 2758 shows that there's no jurisdiction actually over Taiwan, this is a substantive area for them to say, you know what, we support Taiwan's bid to join the ICC. So there's clearly an opportunity there in those countries that are seeking other ways to support Taiwan. And I think as you very correctly raised, Taiwan has struggled to join blocs that are US-led, right? Or at one point were US-led. This is not a US-led bloc. This is an opportunity to pursue a different kind of foreign policy that's not breaking from the United States. It's keeping that military relationship with the United States, which is the ultimate deterrent, right? But it's adding something new. It's adding a new kind of values-based diplomacy. That's a way to say, you know, we're not here just a US puppet. This is not about the balance of power. This is simply about there's a normal state here. It's called ROC Taiwan, and it stands for these international values, and it's looking to strengthen its ties with other parts of the world that are like-minded on this issue.
Professor Lee, taking Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and also Israel's actions in Gaza, how much of a deterrent effect do you think that Taiwan, if it were able to join ICC against Xi Jinping's actions against Taiwan?
The Palestine has been the member in ICC since 2015, and they only filed I mentioned that three options that you can file ask for investigation. They only ask for investigation in 2021. Okay, so for Palestine, is a member already. Okay, for Ukraine, the case is different. Ukraine become a member, a formally member of ICC only this year, January this year. So before that, the other countries, there are 40-something countries ask for the investigation. Those 40 countries are state parties of ICC. So thinking about this, if Taiwan really wanted to ask, and they are war-torn areas, right, different from Taiwan. Okay, so that's why it get a lot of international support. But I of course will be happy to see that international support for us to give a voice to join ICC. But you know, given these two cases, they are quite different from Taiwan.
Okay. Sasha, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's important to remember that also in both of these wars, they're not over yet, right? No. We still don't know what the long-term fallout will be. We're seeing some immediate repercussions. Both Russian and Israeli officials have been limited in their international travel. They become to different extents pariahs, and there's still reverberations around the region and the world, right? So we will actually see how that ends up in the end, and then we can draw longer-term conclusions. But it's also important to think about that question, right, of what is the deterrent effect, right? In two aspects, right? One is the timeline on that. You know, obviously joining the court in the middle of alleged war crimes being in progress is less of a deterrent than doing it beforehand. But second of all, also looking at scale, right? A lot of people think about deterrence just in the case of deterring a war, right? And it's clear international law does essentially nothing to deter wars. States make a decision to go to war when they feel their security situation is threatened, right? Or they feel they have no choice but to do that. They're going to completely discard international law. But if we think about some of the gray zone tactics that China may try to impose on Taiwan, right? Attempting to do a blockade, a quarantine, these kinds of situations that would violate international law in these cases. And actually, there's precedent set by the arrest warrants against the Israeli officials specifically cite, right, cutting off electricity power supplies, cutting off medicine, and cutting off food. These are the three things that China would severely cut off from either Taiwan or one of Taiwan's outlying islands were they to do one of these kind of blockades. This could perhaps cause Chinese officials to think twice about that. I'm not saying it's a huge deterrent, but it's something to think about. And when Taiwan is trying to put a lot of factors in the deter column, it's one it should add for free that it can just do.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. We've reached our time. Thank you so much, Chyungly Lee and Sasha Chhabra, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.